Welcome back. You're watching Showdown. We're joined now by Dr. Andrew Leigh. He's a former professor of economics at ANU and he's now a Labor MP. Wasted on the backbench, in my opinion. Dr. Leigh, let me ask you straight up, as an economist, is a $1.5 billion surplus target anywhere near realistic for being achieved, given the much larger size of the budget as a whole?
I think it is, Peter. I think it's an achievable surplus. I mean, obviously, these are challenging times to be putting a budget together. There's no secret in that. What's going on in Europe is troubling. And we've also seen a US economy that has unemployment close on 10%. And so this is a challenging time, but I think we've made some pretty tough decisions in this mid-year economic and fiscal outlook that will see us through to surplus.
But a $1.5 billion surplus target is so slender. It wouldn't take very much in terms of tweaks in the budget for that to suddenly turn into $1.5 billion in the red.
Well, Peter, I mean, I guess this goes back to the big question, which a lot of people tend to ask, which is, why do you want to get back into surplus? Why don't you just put off the surplus task into the future? So let's go to that question, because it's something that arises a lot. What we've just seen in Europe is a range of governments that fail to stick to their fiscal rules. Europe had very clear rules about debt and deficits. Debt shouldn't go past 60% of GDP. Deficits shouldn't be more than 3%. But consistently, country after country breached those rules. And we've now seen Europe in the position where 15 of the members of the Eurozone are on the watch list for a downgrade. This is a really serious issue for Europe, and it's arisen because of an unwillingness to stick by fiscal rules, because of a willingness to say, well, maybe those fiscal rules just aren't right this year, and we know that that way lies some serious problems.
But hitting the short-term target isn't that important. Surely it's much more about the longer-term consequences of what happens a year or two after that.
So, Peter, this sounds like the argument of make me chaste and pure, but not yet. The longer you put off something like this, the easier it becomes to come up with a reason next year why we shouldn't be back into surplus, or the year after. There are always good things that a government can do. And I'm constantly aware when I'm standing up in front of a local community forum in Charnwood or Belconnen that people will say to me, why don't you spend more money on disability? Couldn't you spend more money on our local roads? Wouldn't it be great if we boosted university funding? And while you're at it, why not put more money into the hospitals? All these are reasonable requests, but governments in the end have to balance the books. And I think having a target like this does crystallise thinking in the right way. This is a question of political economy, and I think the government has made the right call from a political standpoint and an economic standpoint.
I spoke to the Assistant Shadow Treasurer, Matthias Cormann, a little earlier about a report on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald into the contemplation by the government of this idea of a supercharged profits tax in terms of company tax, which would be on the banks and the big miners, and it would be replacing company tax on, for example, manufacturing companies or small business, such that they may even pay no tax. Now, I know it's early days, but what is your view? Is this something you'd be supportive of?
Well, there was certainly some discussion at the Tax Forum over the tax treatment of losses, which I understand is what's being focused on here. The notion of an allowance for corporate equity was treated with approval in the Henry Review. And that's one of the things that the government is looking at. The right economic treatment of losses turns out to be a pretty complicated area in tax law. You don't want to create perverse incentives for people to create companies that make huge losses and then go bust. So you have to get the balance right on this, but you also always want to be encouraging entrepreneurs to invest in new technologies and to make decisions that are right for the long run, not just for the short run. All of those are the balancing acts that we're engaged in setting the business tax rates the right way and trying to work out the right loss treatment. But we've just seen one of the useful examples of that in the move from a royalty system to a profits-based system. A lot of people talk about the minerals resource rent tax as a way of the rest of the community getting their fair share for the minerals that are ours, and that's certainly true. but it's also a more efficient type of tax. No, there's not a good argument for the old royalties regime. They're less efficient. We saw that in the shift from a royalty system to a profits-based system in the Bass Strait oil extraction systems, and we'll see it again in the minerals resource rent tax. It's just a better way of taxing the mining sector, and that's something that I'm astonished the Coalition can't figure out.
On a different topic entirely, the National Conference for Labor over the weekend just passed. As a non-factional operator yourself, were you dismayed at the sort of factional shenanigans by both the left and the right that forced voting blocks in particular ways?
Oh, Peter, I'm aware that I'm an odd fish swimming in a sea of factional people, many of whom are good friends and people I admire. My personal choice is not to join a faction, but there are many good people within the factional system, and there's certainly scope for arguments to come through made by people outside the factional system. So I had the opportunity, for example, to stand up in the conference in the education debate and to speak about early childhood investments and also to draw a very clear contrast between Labor's policy of ensuring that every kid gets a great education and Tony Abbott's approach of seeing only the right kids stay on to finish school or trades training. There's a very clear ideological contrast there, and certainly there was no barrier at the conference for me as a non-factional person standing up and pointing that out. But
you'd agree it's unusual, surely, that you can have people that you're talking to on the floor of the conference about particular issues and how they feel they could even speak on it. But then suddenly when the votes are cast and the factional warlords make their determinations, you're left in a situation where they're voting the way of the faction and what it tells them to do rather than what they may actually think themselves or even have expressed.
Well, Peter, I think people can sometimes overplay the role of factions in the Labor Party. Every grouping, whether it's a local bowls club or the PNC or even, frankly, the Liberal or National parties have their groupings. In the Labor Party, those groupings are more formalised, but they're formalised around ideology rather than personality. The strange thing that you always get in the Liberal Party is this idea that the blocs are friends of Tony and friends of Malcolm, and that's a bit of a strange way to have your internal debates. I think the factions actually, at their best, channel the discussions through an ideological lens and allow us to have big and feisty debates around issues like gay marriage, uranium sales to India. We'll disagree in our party conference, but then we come together united in the caucus around the decision that has been made by conference.
It's an interesting situation, though, isn't it, that the Labor platform on gay marriage has been changed, yet the Prime Minister says that she's opposed to it. Now, can you think of any example in history where a Labor leader, a Prime Minister in particular, has held a different position to what the party platform dictates?
Well, certainly this is an issue in which the Prime Minister has stated her views very strongly. I'm one of those in the Labor Party who takes a view that I believe it's appropriate to allow gay marriage, but these views are passionately felt and for some people grounded in religious or deep cultural underpinnings, and so I think a conscience vote is a way of recognising that difference within the caucus and allowing people to vote freely on the floor. You've seen that in issues around euthanasia, around stem cells, policies where Labor members have had the opportunity to differ from their leader. That's of course not true in the Liberal Party, and so we know that there are Liberal members of Parliament who differ with Tony Abbott on the issue of gay marriage, who won't be allowed the freedom to exercise their conscience on the floor of Parliament, and I think that's a pity.
Okay, you're pro-gay marriage, I have the same view, but it's easy for us, isn't it, to say that. You're an MP in Canberra, I live in inner city Sydney, in our latte areas, it's easy for us to hold those views, but for Labor MPs who are trying to hold on to conservative electorates, it's different for them, isn't it? It'll be very tough for them to hold those seats, even if they exercise their own conscience against gay marriage, now that the Labor Party platform says that that is something that the party supports.
Look, Peter, I'm a macchiato kind of guy rather than a latte guy, but I take your point in general. But I think we ought to be letting policy drive politics rather than the other way around. I think a party is heading for oblivion when it can only make political decisions based on what the focus groups and the polls tell it. I think on this issue, as on others, we need to do what members decide is appropriate. And in this case, members have had many opportunities to go out and speak to their constituents. That process has left me with a much greater respect for both sides of the argument, a view that the opponents and the proponents of gay marriage have strong views, sincerely held, and a sense that we need to conduct the debate with respect. And I think that's true across the country. There's no electorate on Australia where everybody supports gay marriage. There's no electorate where everybody opposes gay marriage, and so the compromise we've got is the right one.
One final question. There was a report yesterday by Phil Curry about a leaked document, sections of the Faulkner Co review into Labor's problems from the last election. It was highly critical of Kevin Rudd, his supporters in particular, suggesting that they had leaked some of these damaging revelations during the election campaign about Labor. Now, presumably for that to be leaked to the journalist, it came from a Gillard supporter. You'd have to be critical of that, wouldn't you, Dr. Leigh? It's not the kind of thing that the party needs right now, where it's getting some good news and some momentum ahead of the summer break.
Peter, I think there is a time and a place for petty personal gossip, and that time and place is in the playground at primary school. I'm focused instead on big challenges, the ones around creating a national disability insurance scheme, around putting Australia on a strong fiscal footing, not this sort of budget black hole that the Liberals are facing. Challenges around building better schools and improving the healthcare system. All those things are the things that made me get up in the morning, and the things that drove me to enter Parliament, not focusing on gossip, polls and leaks. OK, but nonetheless, you would be critical, would you, I guess, just as Kevin Rudd supporters have been, who are furious with the leaking of it? I just don't think there's any value in me giving it any oxygen, Peter. There are so many interesting challenges in modern politics today. I mean, I've just come from doing an event with Jenny Macklin at a local Pegasus riding school, and we had a discussion there with some of the carers about what a national disability insurance scheme would mean. That's hard reform to do. We're committed to the overall goals, but the process of getting there will be complicated. So frankly, I'd much rather be talking about issues of substance than issues of gossip and spin.
Dr. Andrew Leigh, thank you very much for joining us on Showdown.
Thanks for the chance, Peter.
Before we